Okay, so this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to some basic animation techniques using Adobe After Effects. So this is the welcome screen in Adobe After Effects. I'm going to create a new composition by clicking New Composition. Let's just move that screen over there so we can see it better. So the composition name, I'm going to call this Mountain Land. Okay, so the basic settings, the preset, you can choose a variety of different sizes. My custom preset by default is 1920 by 1080, so standard 1080 HD resolution. Don't worry too much about the rest of the settings. The frame rate's 50 frames per second for those of you that like technical detail. The resolution is full, and you can choose how long the composition is going to be. So this bit's quite important. Now this is frames. 5 frames isn't a lot. There's 50 frames in a second, so that's a tenth of a second. I want this to be 10 seconds long. That will do. And the background color is the background color of the composition itself. So it's not going to affect your output, but it's good to have quite a light background color as a source of reference. There we go. So here's my composition at present. Let me just enlarge that slightly. There we go. So what we have here in Adobe After Effects, we have our toolbar up here, including the selection tool, which we're familiar with from Illustrator now. The first thing I want to do is import my media. So down here is where all of your media is. So at the moment, this is the composition, which has nothing in it. I'm just going to go to File, Import File. I'm going to import my file. Which is called depthtest.ai. Now the important thing when importing files is make sure the inputter as a composition retain layer sizes. This is very important because if you don't retain the layer sizes, your layers are going to be slightly different sizes, so it's going to make it very difficult to animate individual objects. If you import it as footage, it's going to flatten down your composition. You're going to lose all of your layers. So make sure you import the composition and retain layer sizes, so all that work you've done into paying attention to your layers isn't lost. So I'm going to pick Open. And there we go. You see by this icon here, this is a composition. This is our new composition we've created. So you can basically nest compositions within compositions. Or you can open the compositions separately. Now, this is where it can get quite confusing quite quickly. So what you might notice down at the bottom is I have various tabs. I have Mountain Land, which is the name of the composition I created, and I have Depth Test, which is the composition that I've just imported from Illustrator. So what you can have is different elements in there effectively. So if I import something else, let's import my animated character. Again, I'll choose composition, retain layer sizes. You'll see I can nest him either straight into Mountain Land or into Depth Test. I'm going to put him inside Mountain Land. So he's inside Mountain Land, but he's not inside Depth Test. So they're separate layers. So I can apply any corrections to the exposure or the colors to that one without affecting the whole thing. So I think it's good to have compositions within compositions for that reason. So let me just move that character. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I've got various clouds dotted around this depth test asset, which I'm going to animate. So if I go to my depth test tab, I can either click on there, I can double click on this layer down here, or I can double click on this composition up here. Either way, it'll open up this particular composition. Now you'll notice down here my layers have changed. So I've got things like clouds foreground, I've got trees and hills, I've got layer 2, which is the mountains, I've got clouds, which are the clouds behind, and layer 1. Now the first thing I'm going to do is rename layer 1 by right clicking. I'm going to rename, I'm going to call it Sky, and I'll rename layer 2 to Mountains, because that's something I didn't do when I originally created this artwork. So moving on to animation. I'm going to animate this cloud moving from left to right. So by selecting this cloud, you can see it selected that area there. You can expand each of these layers for more options. You then have the option to expand transform. You'll see there's a variety of different things you can change here. The anchor point, which is basically where any movements will happen from. So to give an example of what I mean, if I rotate it, it's rotating from that anchor point. I'm just dragging these numbers to the left and the right with the left mouse button. Let me just undo that. So if I change the anchor point and I rotate it again, you'll see the pivot is in a different area. That's very useful for animating limbs or any part of a character you want to move in a specific area. There's the position tool, which again, if I drag these numbers to the left and the right, you'll see it changes the position, the X and the Y coordinates. You have the scale option, which does what it says in the tin. We've already touched on rotation, and you have opacity. Now these little stopwatches, these basically allow you to toggle whether or not they're animated. So if you're changing these at the moment, they're just going to change the position, for example, but it's just changed the position of where it's going to be overall. If you click on the stopwatch, that's now toggled animation mode. So if we look over here at the timeline, we can see little diamond disappeared. Let me undo that so you can see the difference. No diamond, diamond. That means at this point in your animation, your cloud is in this position. If I move along to the end of the composition and I add another key point, so I click on that little diamond, another keyframe, sorry, that's put another diamond in at the end. So it says, at this point in the animation, your cloud is at these coordinates. At this point in the animation, your cloud is at these coordinates, which are currently the same. So let's drag that to the right. There we go. Now if I go back to the beginning of the timeline and press spacebar to play, you'll see the animation between the start and finish point is automatically put in for me. There we go. Now let's just do the same for the other clouds. These ones are further away, so they're going to move slightly slower. I toggle the stopwatch for position. I go right at the end of my composition and I move these along over there. There we go. Now let's take the playhead back to the beginning of the timeline and press play or spacebar. I'm just going to pause that. There we go. So that's now the very basics of animating using keyframes.